we are discussing today about an appraisal of Indian economy. This relates to the course EEC 12, Indian economy since post-independence. In order to take a appraisal of the Indian economy, we can do it in two ways. Since 1950-51, there has been a planned economic development for India. We have crossed more than 50 years in this process, and many developments have taken place. Particularly, the 5-year plans have been a vehicle of growth for the Indian economy. So, what has been the development in Indian economy over these 50 years that we will discuss today? With me, I have Saugata Sen, my colleague here in IGNOU, and we will discuss about this topic on a different sectors of the economy, particularly agriculture, industry, trade, and other aspects, service sectors, and how has been the performance of different sectors of the economy. So I request Saugata to begin with the overall growth in the economy during this last 50 years.
Thank you, Kaustubh. As Kaustubh mentioned, we shall be discussing about the performance of the Indian economy. We shall appraise that performance over the first 4 decades of Indian planning. Mainly, first 4 decades we say because Indian planning started in 1951, and the first 4 decades are till 1991, which is, as you would know, Indian economic reforms started. So what we will do in this session is we will appraise the performance of the economy till the time that reforms were started, and then give an indication of why the reforms were started and how. As has been mentioned, to understand the performance of the Indian economy, we can do it in 2 ways. The first way is to just look at the basic targets and the objectives that were set about the Indian economy in terms of its overall growth rate and targets in various sectors of the economy, and then see how far those targets have been achieved. The other way of appraising the Indian economy is to look at the broad objectives and strategy, and then examine whether the strategies themselves were flawed, fundamentally flawed, or even if the strategies were right, how far the strategies were adhered to in following, or in another way of putting it is whether the strategies needed to be changed at a certain point in the development of the Indian economy and were actually not changed. So if we start with the basic strategy, the basic objective of Indian planning, and it was realized that for a developing nation where much of the people are poor and investment resources would not be forthcoming in the manner required, the state has to play an important role. So the state did 3 things. Number 1, the state occupied what is called the commanding heights of the economy, the core sectors like steel and coal and other things the state kept with itself. The second thing that the state did in terms of intervention right in the early 1950s was to regulate the performance or regulate the activities of the private sector, especially in industry. And the third thing that India did in terms of the state was to assign the state the role of a comprehensive planning in the economy. The broad objectives of planning in India have been growth, modernization, self-reliance, and social justice. Here self-reliance meant that India would not take recourse too much to imports from abroad and foreign investment, except in a few areas, and try to go in for an import substitution strategy and try to be self-reliant in producing and distributing its own resources. So India tried to grow as fast as possible. Secondly, the objective was to see that there is social justice in terms of employment generation and removal of poverty and reduction in inequality, both income inequality, regional disparities. Then India wanted to modernize itself from a backward agricultural economy to a modern industrial economy. So these were the 4 broad objectives, and I would now request Kaustubh to carry the discussion further.
I would like to add one more thing, that all these 4 objectives of the Indian planning, they are a bit interrelated. When there is a growth, the growth is distributed among the people in the country. suppose it is easier to distribute the additional income that is being generated to the people, and it is not possible to redistribute the existing wealth only when there is no growth. So there is a basic difference between growth and development. What happens, growth is pertains to the growth in the national income or the GDP of the country, but development is a much broader concept. It deals with areas such as social justice, such as infrastructure, such as health, education, the overall living standard of people. So what India wanted was development of the economy. So growth was a vehicle through which the development was to be achieved. And what happens, that when the growth takes place, the growth has to take place through modernization, particularly in the industrial sector, and that too in the capital goods industry. And when this development is taking place, when this growth is taking place, the additional income is being distributed through employment generation, through the shares of the accruing to different sections of the society, through allocation of industries in different regions, particularly in the backward areas of the country also. So in this way, the growth, modernization, social justice, all these three objectives are interrelated. The self-reliance, it is a strategy or defensive policy, particularly in the Indian context. When you look into the quality of goods, the trade, the foreign exchange reserve in the country, so while keeping all these things in view, the policy adopted at that point of time was that India has to be self-sufficient in the long run. So in order to conserve foreign exchange, India started producing whatever they could produce within the country. So instead of promoting exports, India started a curtailment of imports. India started producing those goods, and this has some other repercussions, some adverse effects, which we will discuss later on. But regarding this growth particularly, we would like to point out that in the beginning, in the first 3 5-year plans, the growth rate in the Indian economy was quite low. It was almost about 3.5% per annum. But later on, starting with the late 70s, the growth rate in the Indian economy that picked up. It exceeded 5% in certain 5-year plans. It touched even 6.5% later on during 1990s. So what is happening, that the overall growth in the economy has been less than expectation most of the time. Particularly in the first 15 years, the growth rate was quite low, not 15 years, particularly 25 years till 1975 or late 70s. The growth rate was quite low. In fact, many economists would say that this is a Hindu rate of growth, this 3.5%. But with sudden changes in the economy, change in certain economic policy, the growth rate picked up, particularly since 1980. So,
as has been mentioned, the growth actually picked up only in 1980 and later. Till then, and even in the period before 1980, if you look at the period 1951 to 1981 or so, in the initial 15 years, the growth was at a much higher pace, at about 5% till about 1965, the mid 60s. It was from the mid 60s onwards, and because of a shift in strategy, that somehow the growth rate of India did not match up to the expectations that it did. But the interesting thing here is that we are talking of the growth rate of the gross domestic product. At the same time, the population of India was growing at a rate of about 2.15% per annum, which meant that the per capita GDP growth was growing not more than 2.5% per annum. So this is not a very high rate of growth per person in the economy in terms, if you look at international comparisons, both in countries like the Far Eastern countries like Japan first, and then Hong Kong and Singapore later. This is the period when they suddenly burst forth. The question that arises is, if the population was growing so fast, what happened to the labor force? The labor force was growing again at the rate of 2.4%. Labor force means the people who were actually looking for jobs and were looking for employment. But employment till the 1980s grew only at about 2% per annum, and In the 1980s, actually that rate fell and it went down to 1.8% per annum. So labor force growth always outstripped growth in employment. So the problem of employment, especially in the organized sector, constantly stayed in the Indian economy. And if you look at growth rate, again we might say the growth was mainly in few regions and few sectors. There was great disparity in this growth rate, as we shall continue. And Kaustubh can
particularly what will happen, let's look into the sectoral composition of the economy impact. Over the years what has happened, that primarily there are three basic sectors: the agricultural sector, the industrial sector and the services sector. So the composition of this was if you look into 1950, the picture in 1950 was that agriculture contributed nearly 50% of the GDP, whereas the services sector and industrial sector, the remaining 50% was contributed by these two sectors. But if you look into the development process, the agricultural sector, the growth rate was lower than the industrial sector and services sector. As a result, what happened, that the share of the agricultural sector declined rapidly in the GDP. In the year 1999-2000, this year has come down to about 25% of the GDP. So like the share of agriculture has declined. On the other hand, the share of services sector has gone up. As of today, the share of the services sector in the economy, in the GDP, is nearly 50%. The industrial sector contributes about 26 to 27% of the GDP. So what is happening? The agricultural production has been slower. As a result, the share of agriculture is declining. The industrial sector is growing fast. The services sector is growing very fast. But if you look into the employment pattern in the economy, the services sector and industrial sector, they employ very few people. The consequence is that the productivity or the efficiency of these sectors is high compared to the agricultural sector. The productivity of the services sector is quite high, but like the productivity of the agricultural sector is quite low. The agricultural sector that employs nearly 60% of the labor force in the economy, there has been slight decline from 67-68% in 1970 to 60% like employment in the year 2000, but compared to that 60% labor force contributing only like 25% of GDP, this is a very big mismatch. Whereas only 20 to 22% people employed in the services sector, they are contributing about 50%.
So actually, if you look at the process of development in most countries, most developed nations of today, and this is a finding that has often been expressed by economist Simon Kuznets, is that as a nation progresses, one of the signs of modernization is that modernization takes place through industrialization. We talk of the industrial revolution that took place in England, in Europe, in America. Everywhere you will find that the share of agriculture in industry, in GDP or the national income of the country actually falls. And this has actually happened in India, which should have been a good thing in terms of development. But as has been pointed out, what was happening at the same time was the proportion of labor force in agriculture that continued to be very, very high. You have just heard that the services sector now contributes about 50% of the GDP, and that is one of the reasons why the finance minister in recent times is has started and is expanding, likely to expand the scope of the service tax in more and more products. But agriculture still employing 60% of the labor force is a huge substantial section of the labor force being employed in agriculture, and agriculture continues to be low in productivity and yield. Thirdly, agricultural growth is not spread all over the nation. Now what happened in agriculture was that in the initial years, because of political constraints, in a populated nation like India, the authorities or the planners could have gone in for land reforms, which was not actually carried out to the extent that was desired. Unlike other nations which have population pressure in agriculture like Japan or Taiwan, which immediately went in for land reforms and which yielded high agricultural growth, India till the mid 60s had a precarious agricultural position. In the mid 60s, the route that India adopted for agriculture was to put in high technology, high yielding variety of seeds, and this led to complementary inputs like harvester threshers and tractors. It needed water pumps, it needed huge irrigation facilities, and it needed marketed inputs and increased the scope of credit. Now, naturally, these kind of situations were present only in a few regions of the country, and resultantly, the high yielding variety seeds or the new agricultural strategy, which is popularly called Green Revolution, took place mainly in the north and west of India and few pockets of Andhra Pradesh or eastern India, but mainly it was limited to wheat products, and it was limited to Punjab, Haryana, western UP primarily. Now, this pushed up the yield substantially, but also at the same time increased the instability in agriculture, and it led to regional disparities. It also led to inequality within agricultural sector. So, this is, though India acquired self-sufficiency in food grains, the spread of agriculture did not take place to the extent that it could have. Now, one of the features of developing nations or any nation in its process of development is that it solves the problem of agriculture first. Even if you look at, you must be aware because of comparisons with China, if you look at the liberalization experience of China, China first solved the liberalization process in agriculture. Whichever institutional method one may follow, but it is first implemented in agriculture, and once that is done, then it moves on to other areas. So, India did not actually solve the problem of agriculture and food availability and productivity. Both these problems continue to dog the nations. One is availability of food grains, rather per capita availability of food grains, and second, spread and an equitable spread in terms of regions of agriculture all over the nations.
In fact, if you look into this agricultural development in India, the development strategy has been to implement this water, seed and fertilizer, these three complementary inputs together. So, as a result, what happened, those farmers who had the access to capital, particularly those big farmers, they could purchase these marketed inputs, these HYV seeds, these chemical fertilizers, and it was successful in the region where this irrigation potential was there, irrigation facilities was available. So, this Haryana, Punjab, western UP and some segments of Tamil Nadu and Andhra Pradesh, these were the regions where green revolution could be successful. And if you look at the strategy of 1960s, at that time the HYV seeds, high yielding variety seeds, was available in a limited crops only. Wheat was one such crop, and wheat became like very profitable. As a result, like the wheat growing region, particularly this Punjab, Haryana, UP, they became very developed. The farmers, they gained a lot. Then secondly, what has happened, that the big farmers, they had the access to these marketed inputs. So, as a result, they could like adopt these HYV seeds like in a bigger way than the poor, marginal and small farmers. So, over time, what has happened, that in a traditional agriculture, the farm size and yield, that is inversely related. Like what happens, a marginal farmer or a small farmer can personally supervise his field, and as a result the yield is higher in the small farms. The bigger farms, they have lower yield on an average. But this green revolution, that changed that like inverse relationship altogether, because these bigger farms, like because of their accessibility to capital, because of their like larger capital base, they could go for these mechanized inputs and they could reap higher yield. So, this inverse relationship between farm size and yield, that got like changed during this 1960s because of the green revolution. But the agricultural farmer, they gained a little bit because of this green revolution. What happened, that because of this short duration of these crops, this green revolution crops, like the number of crops that could be generated in a particular year got doubled or even tripled also. So, as a result, employment in the agricultural sector increased, and agricultural laborer, they could find sufficient demand. So there is a lot of migration from suppose the other pockets of the country to this Punjab, Haryana and UP. Lot of agricultural laborers, they migrated to this part. Agricultural wage increased and the agricultural farmers, particularly the landless laborers, they became a little bit beneficiary. But if you look into this thing, that the overall yield, overall output in the agricultural sector has increased. Gradually over time, these marginal farmers and small farmers, they also adopted these HIV seeds. In other crops also, these HIV seeds came into being. It got spread to other parts of the country also. So overall, on the whole, the output has increased. India has become sufficient. The marginal and small farmers have also gained out of this HIV like seeds and green revolution. But the bigger farmers, they have gained relatively higher than the small and marginal farmers.
Yeah, one of the things that has happened is, as we were saying, is that regional disparity has increased because of green revolution, because it was limited to primarily to areas which had irrigation. Secondly, instability in agriculture has increased, and third, inequality has increased because the larger farmers, because of the complementary nature of the inputs, the input package required, the larger farmers could afford to go in for this package, and therefore they gained substantially more. But in recent times, an unusual experiment or unusual feature that has been seen in the Indian agriculture, or rather one case study, and that may be of some importance, is that there are certain states where land reforms and Panchayati Raj institutions have been implemented in a very methodical and very successful manner, and one such example is that of West Bengal. Now, because of the left front government's ascension to power in 1977, one of the things that the West Bengal government did was to go in for land reforms comprehensively. Now, initially it was thought that the main effect of land reforms was to increase equity, give the the small and marginal farmers some land, some dignity, and there was systematization of the land records. But after a couple of decades, what began to be seen is that because of small farmers also getting some land, and because of this inverse relationship that was thought to exist in agriculture between farm size and yield, that seems to have come into operation again, with the result that per acre yield of agriculture, mainly paddy in West Bengal, has gone up tremendously. So with the result, the productivity and production in general of paddy and other related things like vegetables, many vegetables, has gone up, so that over the last 6 or 7 years, West Bengal has now become what was the position of Andhra Pradesh. West Bengal is now the largest producer of rice. Now, this increase in production has come about not through improved technology, but primarily through land reforms, and land reforms seems to have yielded results in terms of higher productivity. Now, we have talked of agriculture. If we just move to industry a bit, we find that the main focus of Indian planning and the basic strategy, the basic scaffolding of the second 5-year plan, which was the basis from which all subsequent plans were developed, was to develop India industrially and to develop India, modernize India through industry. Now, the experience before the planners, both of the developed Western nations as well as of socialist Soviet economy, was that industrialization played a very major role in modernizing the economy and creating very fast growth. So therefore, the planners in India thought for India to develop very fast, what was required was to develop heavy industries. By heavy industries, it meant industries or that will produce machines, which in turn, instead of producing directly consumer goods or the products, will produce other machines, so that the machines will produce more machines, which in turn will produce capital, consumer goods and other products, and this will supposedly increase the productivity of the economy. And you will remember that around this time, or from around this time, primarily due to the vision of Nehru, What went together with this strategy was a tremendous emphasis on science and technology, not only in terms of industry but also through science and technology education. This was the time when the IITs were set up in the country. This was the time when India's atomic research took off in a big way. This was the time when scientists like Homi Bhabha and Vikram Sarabhai helped in the atomic research and in space research, the results of which we have seen since the 1970s onwards. India is one of the most advanced nations in terms of atomic research. We used to talk of the brain drain in the 70s and 80s because of the situations not producing, but it was the policies adopted in this time that created the brain in the first place. So India wanted to modernize and modernize very fast. So India went in for a heavy industry capital, what is called a K-type capital in a technical jargon, a heavy industry to modernize. Now two things went along with it. First, it was thought that till independence, to go back to the experience of independence, Indian planners knew that whenever Indian industrialists had invested, Indian capitalism was mainly of the merchant. Indian entrepreneurs had mainly gone in for speculation or in the financial things. The main industry where Indian capitalists had gone in for was some steel and cotton and jute industry. Now they were regionally based. For instance, the cotton industry was mainly in the western of India. The jute and steel industry were in Bihar, Odisha, West Bengal, that area. So the government wanted to modernize and go about a balanced regional development. But it also knew that investments in such heavy investments which will not generate immediate profits would not be forthcoming from the private sector. So the government decided to invest itself. Now the third thing that the government did was to, because of its fear, having been a colonized economy and having been, at that time there was a skepticism about international trade, and it was thought that once trade takes place, the developed nations will gain at the cost of developing nations. The terms of trade, are rather the export price as compared to the import price, will fall, which means the developing nations will not earn as much as they will have to spend by paying for imports. That will worsen against them. So the country will become dependent on foreign capital, multinationals and so on and so forth. With this kind of thinking, it was felt that the government should ensure A, production largely took place by the public sector, B, it took place within the nation by Indian enterprise, and C, it was equitable and it was modern.
Yes, particularly this sort of policy which was adopted in India, the industrial policy, a lot of controls were imposed on the private sector. The public sector, that was supposed to be the commanding heights of the economy, at one point of time the public sector contributed about 10% of the GDP, 1960, if we look into the figure. But by the year 1990, the public sector started contributing about 25% of the GDP. So a lot of investment has gone into the public sector, and the public sector has expanded at a much faster rate. The role of the private sector at that point of time was considered to be supplementary. It was mostly in the consumer goods sector. So if you look into the growth rate of the industrial sector, like in the year 1960, suppose in the industrial sector there are two segments particularly, the organized sector and the unorganized sector. In the organized sector, the industries which employ more than 20 laborers, if they are not using electricity, and if you are using electricity, then it is more than 10 employees. So this organized sector, they grew much faster. The organized sector and unorganized sector in the year 1960, they were contributing equally around 4.5%. But if you look into the figure of 1990, at that point of time, the organized sector contributed about 11%, while the unorganized sector contributed about 6% only. So what has happened, that a lot of investment has gone into the public sector, the organized sector, whereas the unorganized sector, which is mostly employment intensive industries and very informal, cottage based, village based, so those sector has not grown up to expectation. And another thing that has happened is that the there is a lot of restriction was imposed during 60s and 70s. As a result, what is happening that license Raj, that in order to expand, in order to set up one industry, in order to relocate one industry, in order to shut down an industry, for everything you need a permission. So because of this license Raj, the growth of the industrial sector was curtailed, it was constrained. So while the other developing countries, if you look into these Asian tigers, they could succeed so high during this 50 years, India remained as a big elephant. It moved very slow. So what is happening that sensing these sort of restrictions, this which stifled growth in the economy, there is a major policy change in the 80s in a very ad hoc and very fragmented manner, but in the full-fledged liberalization or economic reforms came in the year 1991. So
yeah, as has been mentioned, the main problem with the Indian industry was while the government occupied the center stage in terms of production itself, what it also sought to do, and because it feared that in a country like India, most of the people being poor at the time of independence, it was about 50% or more who are below the poverty line, it was felt that once you give free rein to the private sector, they will only think of their own profits and they will not be socially responsible, and this will increase the inequality in the economy. So the government sought measures to curb and control and regulate the private industry as well. So apart from occupying the commanding heights itself, it also sought to regulate. So with the result that whenever a company wanted or a firm wanted to expand production or set up production or relocate, as has been mentioned, or even shut down, it needed a license. It had to fulfill many conditions to obtain that license, and this created many problems. Number one, it created delays, it created inefficiency, it distorted the incentive pattern for production and enterprise in the economy, and it also increased the ad hoc and arbitrary power of bureaucrats and the ministers, the bureaucrats, and there was increasing political interference in the country. Now, apart from the fact that government was itself controlling private industry, occupying industry, in 1969 the government felt even finance was growing to the rich sectors or to the rich people for their own investment, or the rich farmers. It was not going to socially desirable areas or not to agriculture, because most of Indian economy was governed by agriculture. So in 1969 the government nationalized 14 major banks, and in 1980 nationalized 6 more. So the government was totally controlling the production. There were some voices in the wilderness. You would be interested to know that the current Prime Minister, Dr. Manmohan Singh, and who can be called the architect of reforms in 1991 when India dismantled this license permit Raj, way back in 1964 had published a book which stressed the importance of exports. At a time when India was scared of exporting, India had what was called export pessimism, and it had an import substitution strategy which India was trying to manufacture on its own things it could have imported, and India did not try to see where its comparative advantage lay and where it could have exported. We will be coming in a little while to the foreign trade sector, but India was at that moment scared of exporting, looking at export promotion, and was trying to only substitute imports by domestic production. And it is the same time that countries like Korea, countries like Taiwan, even if you leave out small city states like Hong Kong and Singapore, which are not fully fledged countries and which don't have any agriculture, even if you look at nations which were at the same level of development like India in the 1950s, completely left India behind, took full advantage of the route through international trade and exports, diversified their production base, and grew by leaps and bounds where India lagged behind. And even in nations where the state did play a major role in terms of regulation, it was a very positive regulation by the Japanese Ministry of Industry, which gave correct incentives, with the result that after Second World War Japan grew at a very fast rate. India's model continued to be for long time Soviet Union, and India felt that the Soviet Union was so late in terms of industrialization but had grown so fast. It was a backward country, primarily agricultural country, but had modernized its industry within a very short time. And as soon as it had started industrializing, it was hit very badly by the Second World War, which almost destroyed its industrial base, and 20 million people lost their lives. But again, soon after Second World War, on its own, without any foreign assistance, it rebuilt itself again, and it was the first country to send a man, woman, or a spaceship into space. It became a military superpower. So all these things impressed Indian planners, and they decided to follow the Soviet model by and large, both as a plan model and also as an industrialization strategy. But as we have been saying, it did not work, and by 1991 it was felt that there was a comprehensive need for strategy change, although some ad hoc measures, as has been said, was being adopted since 1980 onwards, when Mrs. Gandhi came to power for second time, and then there was a new industrial policy, and by bits and starts in pieces, there was some foreign investment, foreign collaboration allowed, say in electronics industry, which is the time when electronics industry grew, or you would have collaborations in motorcycle, two-wheeler industry. This was the time when Maruti Suzuki came and Hero Honda motorcycles, mid 80s onwards, and by 1991 it was felt that the old strategy just did not work and India would lag behind, and India went in for liberalization.
Yes, particularly this liberalization, this aspect, this has been there since the 1980s. Some of the broadbanding, that concept of broadbanding that was allowed in 1984-85 to certain industries, that if a particular firm is producing, let's say, automobiles, in that case it can decide on what ratio of different segments of the automobiles it will produce. It was allowed to do that. So this sort of flexibility in the composition of output was given to these firms. Similarly, some delicensing of certain sectors, certain basic industries were given in 80s itself, some segments at least. So cement, that is one example. So what is happening, that a full-fledged economic reforms took place in 1990s only, particularly in 1991. At that point of time, India was in a very severe economic crisis. The foreign exchange reserve was quite low, inflation was very high, it was double digit. The country was reeling under a severe drought, after effects of a severe drought at that time. So all these things together that put Indian economy in a very, very precarious condition. So India had to seek help from International Monetary Fund and World Bank, and maybe on their suggestion some structural adjustment program was undertaken. So under this program, the economic reforms was undertaken, the license permit Raj was dismantled, many industries were liberalized in the sense that one can set up one firm without seeking a license from the government. Only some environmental concern or some locational policy were the primary concern at that point of time. So on the whole, this economic reforms has been to liberalize the economy, to give a free hand to these entrepreneurs so that they can set up their industries wherever they want, wherever it is viable.
Yeah, as to sum up, we can say that Indian industry and Indian foreign trade was completely liberalized in 1991, and the idea was that in the 50s, again after 1991, the idea was that if we want to reduce inequality and poverty, the best route for that is economic growth and not just direct distribution as was thought during the 70s, which did not work. It did not even lower poverty. So now the hope is that growth will lead to a reduction in poverty, not just modernization but reduction in poverty. And one can give an example like this. Punjab, as we had mentioned, grew very fast in agriculture, and today the proportion of people below the poverty line is only 2%. So let's hope growth will reduce inequality and modernize the economy. Thank you for watching this telecast.
Thank you.